Imagine living in a land where every stone tells a story of exile. Every sunrise brings fear, and every child grows up under the shadow of war. This is the reality of Palestine, a place where history bleeds into the present, and peace remains, a dream constantly shattered by violence. Asterisk, the history of the Palestine country war is rooted in deep historical, religious, and political complexities. In the late 19th century, a movement known as Zionism emerged among European Jews, aiming to establish a national homeland in Palestine, a region already inhabited predominantly by Arab Muslims and Christians under Ottoman rule. Tensions escalated. During World War I, when Britain promised both Jews and Arabs conflicting claims over the same land, after the war, the British took control of Palestine through the League of Nations mandate, encouraging Jewish immigration which alarmed the Arab population. The growing influx of Jews led to repeated clashes between both communities. In 1947, the United Nations proposed a partition plan dividing the land into separate Jewish and Arab states. The Jewish leadership accepted the plan, but the Arabs rejected it, leading to civil war. When Israel declared independence in 1948, several Arab nations invaded. This marked the beginning of the Arab-Israeli War. Israel emerged victorious, taking more territory than was initially allocated by the UN. Over 700,000 Palestinians were displaced, becoming refugees across the Middle East. The territories of the West Bank and Gaza Strip came under Jordanian and Egyptian control, respectively, until Israel captured them during the Six-Day War in 1967. This occupation became the core of ongoing resistance, with the rise of Palestinian groups such as the PLO and later Hamas. Decades of failed peace talks, violent uprisings, and military operations followed. The conflict saw repeated escalations, especially in Gaza, with wars and blockades creating severe humanitarian crises. Political fragmentation between the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank and Hamas in Gaza further complicated statehood efforts. The international community remains divided on solutions, while people in the region continue to endure suffering, displacement, and a deep longing for justice and peace. Asterisk, the origins of the Palestine conflict trace back to the late 19th century, when the region was under Ottoman rule and inhabited mainly by Arab Muslims, with smaller Christian and Jewish communities. During this period, the rise of nationalism across Europe coincided with the emergence of Zionism, a political movement advocating for the establishment of a Jewish homeland in Palestine. European Jews, facing anti-Semitism and persecution, viewed Palestine as their ancestral homeland and began migrating therein, increasing numbers. This early migration was relatively small but steadily grew, supported by wealthy Jewish philanthropists who purchased land for new Jewish settlements. As Jewish immigration increased, so did tensions with the local Arab population, who viewed the newcomers as a threat to their land and way of life. The end of World War I brought the collapse of the Ottoman Empire, and Palestine came under British control through the League of Nations mandate system. During the war, Britain had made conflicting promises to both Jews and Arabs. The Balfour Declaration of 1917 stated British support for a national home for the Jewish people in Palestine, while other British communications suggested support for Arab independence in the region. These contradictory pledges deepened the sense of betrayal among Palestinian Arabs. Under British rule, Jewish immigration continued to grow, further inflaming tensions. Violent clashes erupted in the 1920s and 1930s between Arabs and Jews, often sparked by disputes over land and access to religious sites in Jerusalem. The Arab community began organizing politically to resist what they saw as colonial favoritism towards the Zionist movement. British attempts to mediate were unsuccessful, as they struggled to balance their promises with the realities on the ground. By the end of the 1930s, Palestine had become a deeply divided land, setting the stage for larger confrontations in the decades to come. In 1947, after years of escalating tensions and violence between Jews and Arabs in Palestine, the British government decided to end its mandate and referred the issue to the United Nations. The UN proposed a partition plan that would divide Palestine into two independent states, one Jewish and one Arab, while designating Jerusalem as an international city under UN control. The Jewish leadership accepted the plan, viewing it as a legitimate opportunity for statehood, though they were dissatisfied with the limited territory. The Arab leadership, both in Palestine and in neighboring countries, rejected the proposal, arguing that it violated the rights of the Arab majority, and gave too much land to the Jewish minority, who owned a smaller portion of the land. As soon as the UN voted in favor of the plan in November 1947, civil war erupted between Jewish and Arab communities within Palestine. Armed clashes intensified, with both sides targeting villages, transportation routes, and urban neighborhoods. Zionist militias such as the Haganah and Irgun launched military campaigns to secure Jewish territory, while Arab irregulars and local fighters tried to resist the partition and defend Arab areas. On May 14, 1948, David Ben-Gurion declared the independence of the State of Israel. Within hours, neighboring Arab countries Egypt, Jordan, Syria, Lebanon, and Iraq invaded the new state, initiating the First Arab-Israeli War. Despite being outnumbered, Israel managed to repel the Arab forces and even expanded its territory beyond the borders outlined in the UN plan. By the end of the war in 1949, Israel controlled 78% of historic Palestine. Over 700,000 Palestinians were displaced from their homes, many fleeing to Jordan, Lebanon, Syria, and the Gaza Strip. Their properties were confiscated, and they were never allowed to return. Palestinians remember this period as the Nakba, or catastrophe, marking the beginning of their refugee crisis. In June 1967, tensions between Israel and neighboring Arab states escalated into the Six-Day War, during which Israel launched a preemptive strike against Egypt, Jordan, and Syria. In a matter of days, Israel captured significant territory, including the West Bank from Jordan, Gaza Strip and Sinai Peninsula from Egypt, and the Golan Heights from Syria. The occupation of the West Bank and Gaza brought over 1 million Palestinians under Israeli military control. This marked a turning point in the conflict, as Palestinians in these territories now lived under a system of checkpoints, curfews, and military governance. The loss of land further fueled Palestinian nationalism and resistance. With the Palestine Liberation Organization PLO, led by Yasser Arafat, gaining prominence, the PLO launched guerrilla operations from neighboring countries, including Lebanon and Jordan, seeking to liberate Palestine through armed struggle. In response, Israel carried out retaliatory strikes and cross-border raids, leading to increased instability in the region. The 1973 Yom Kippur War saw Egypt and Syria attempt to reclaim their lost territories by launching a surprise attack on Israel. Though initially successful, they were eventually pushed back, and the war ended in a stalemate. In the late 1970s, Egypt became the first Arab country to sign a peace treaty with Israel following the Camp David Accords, in which Israel agreed to withdraw from the Sinai Peninsula. However, the question of Palestinian statehood remained unresolved. In 1982, Israel invaded Lebanon in an effort to expel the PLO, leading to a brutal siege of Beirut and the eventual relocation of PLO leadership to Tunisia. In the occupied territories, resistance to Israeli rule grew steadily. By the late 1980s, decades of frustration, economic hardship, and political repression culminated in the eruption of the First Intifada, a mass uprising against the occupation that would redefine the Palestinian struggle. During the 1990s, a new phase in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict began with renewed international efforts to achieve peace. The end of the Cold War, the Gulf War, and shifting global politics created conditions for dialogue. In 1993, the Oslo Accords were signed between Israel and the Palestine Liberation Organization, PLO, establishing mutual recognition and a framework for future negotiations. Under Oslo, limited Palestinian self-rule was created through the Palestinian Authority (PA), which gained partial control over areas of the West Bank and Gaza. However, key issues like the status of Jerusalem, refugees, borders, and settlements were left unresolved. Optimism briefly surged, but distrust and violence continued. In 1995, Israeli Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin, a key architect of Oslo, was assassinated by a Jewish extremist opposed to the peace process. His death marked a significant blow to hopes for reconciliation. Over the following years, tensions escalated, as Israel expanded settlements and Palestinians accused it of violating the spirit of the Accords. In 2000, peace talks at Camp David failed, largely over the status of Jerusalem and refugee rights. Soon after, the Second Intifada erupted following a controversial visit by Israeli politician Ariel Sharon to the Al-Aqsa Mosque compound. This uprising was far more violent than the first, involving suicide bombings, Israeli military incursions, and widespread destruction. Thousands were killed, mostly Palestinians. The violence hardened public opinion on both sides. In 2005, Israel unilaterally withdrew from Gaza, removing its settlers and military presence. However, in 2006, the Islamist group Hamas won Palestinian elections and took control of Gaza after a brief civil war with Fatah. Israel and Egypt imposed a blockade on Gaza, citing security concerns. Sporadic rocket fire from Gaza and harsh Israeli responses led to repeated military confrontations, plunging the region into recurring cycles of violence and failed diplomacy. Since 2008, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict has entered a phase marked by repeated military escalations, especially between Israel and Hamas in the Gaza Strip. After Hamas seized full control of Gaza in 2007, Israel and Egypt imposed a strict blockade, restricting movement and goods, which devastated Gaza's economy and fueled resentment. In late 2008, Israel launched Operation Cast Lead, a 3-week military offensive aimed at stopping rocket attacks from Gaza. The war resulted in significant Palestinian civilian casualties and widespread destruction. In 2012, another round of violence occurred, with both sides exchanging rocket fire and airstrikes, ending in an Egyptian-brokered ceasefire. The largest conflict came in 2014 with Operation Protective Edge, a 50-day war sparked by the kidnapping and killing of teenagers on both sides and increased rocket fire. Over 2,200 Palestinians were killed, mostly civilians, and entire neighborhoods in Gaza were flattened. The conflict caused a deep humanitarian crisis and international outrage over civilian casualties and the destruction of infrastructure. Despite temporary ceasefires, violence flared again in 2018 and 2019 during mass protests at the Gaza's rail border, known as the Great March of Return. Israeli forces responded with live fire, killing hundreds and injuring thousands. In May 2021, tensions in Jerusalem over evictions in Sheikh Jarrah and clashes at the Al-Aqsa Mosque escalated into an 11-day war, with Hamas firing rockets at Israeli cities and Israel conducting heavy airstrikes in Gaza. Hundreds of Palestinians were killed, and the damage to infrastructure further deepened Gaza's crisis. The most severe escalation occurred in October 2023 when Hamas launched a surprise attack inside Israel, leading to an unprecedented and brutal military response. Thousands were killed on both sides, and Gaza experienced its worst humanitarian collapse. The international community remains divided and ineffective as the region endures ongoing cycles of war, occupation, resistance, and failed peace efforts. History of the Palestine Country War is a tragic narrative of dispossession, occupation, resistance, and repeated cycles of violence, from the early days of colonial promises and clashing national movements, to wars, peace talks, and brutal escalations in Gaza. The conflict has shaped generations of suffering and political instability. Despite numerous international efforts, the core issues land, refugees, sovereignty, and human rights remain unresolved. Palestinians continue to live under occupation, siege, and displacement, while Israelis live under the fear of attacks and insecurity. Each failed negotiation and violent outbreak further deepens mistrust and despair on both sides, until justice, dignity, and equal rights are addressed for all people in the region. peace will remain a distant hope, and the cost will continue to be paid in human lives.